Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Ohio Dairy Producers Association's virtual annual meeting. I realize that all of us were looking forward to getting together back in April, on April 2nd, when we were all asked to stay home and provide social distancing to keep everyone healthy in our environment around us. And we've done just that, but here we are now in July. There's a lot of information that needs to be shared. And I'm looking forward to having our guest speakers that are joining us today to keep you as dairy farmers and dairy industry guests informed about all the challenges we've been facing, how the dairy industry has been so resilient and working through them. The collaborative spirit and the working together has been nothing short of amazing. But with that being said, our challenges are great and we have much to accomplish. So I'd first like to start by pointing out that we have several sponsors that we have enjoyed their support over the years. And as you can see them on the very first slide. To begin our program today, I'd like to turn it over to Erin Brown to give you just a few pointers on how you can participate in today's annual meeting. Erin?
Yeah, so I'll be acting as the moderator for today. So just some housekeeping things. All participants' videos are turned off and your microphones are placed on mute. We are recording this video and we'll make it available for viewing after the fact on our website, odpa.org. If you have any questions or comments for the speakers, please use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen, circled there in red, and we'll answer those, or also use the chat for any questions about logistics and things. You'll also see there is the raise your hand option. So the speakers will ask for any verbal questions and you can raise your hand. I will place you off of mute and then you can talk and ask your question. You'll also see in the top view, there's a view options button. You can kind of arrange how you see your screen. You can do full screen mode, speaker view, those types of things. And then you'll see to the far right there, whoever is talking, that floating head, you can move that around if it's in your way or you want to customize your screen. And I think that is kind of the basics. So Scott, I will turn it back over to you.
Very good, Erin. Thank you very much for setting up the annual meeting. We appreciate your work behind the scenes. So today's agenda, I'm excited that we have, in addition to my report, which I'll keep it very brief, we just had a board meeting here this morning from 10:30 to 11:25, and the board of directors is keeping their pulse on all the activities of the trade association. I'm honored to have 20 dairy farmers and industry representatives who do a tremendous job of helping guide us as a trade association and empower us to work on your behalf. I will have other speakers lined up today. Mike McCulley, Dairy Product Sales, Milk Pricing and Economic Forecasting. Jim Mulhern is going to be covering federal dairy policy, an update on the CFAP program, and some real cool insights on COVID-19 and how the dairy industry has worked so well in DC to overcome those challenges and provide some support to our dairy industry. And then I'm delighted to have Lisa Watson join us from the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy. She's going to be talking to us about the U.S. Dairy Stewardship Commitment and the 2050 goals that have just recently been announced. And for those of you who have been watching social media, topics like Burger King that just came up the other day are all the reasons why we need to be engaging in the environmental community and setting the record straight and working with the Innovation Center to help do that. And then to bring this thing to a close, Jenny Crabtree, who will be representing the checkoff program. She's going to be sharing with you folks some consumer communications and all the great work that we've been doing to raise the awareness of dairy products in a time when folks have been staying at home, looking for recipes and opportunities to engage in dairy products. So with that, let me stop and say thank you to our sponsors. If it weren't for these companies throughout the year, we would not be able to carry out the programming of the Ohio Dairy Producers Association. So many thanks to folks like the American Dairy Association Mid-East, the combined sponsorship of Centera, Purina, and Mercer Landmark, COBA, Commodity Blenders, Dairy Farmers of America, Farm Bureau, Gerber Food Service, Heartland Bank, Hills Supply, Comback Feeds, Nationwide, and United Dairy. So I want to thank all of you that are on this call today observing this for your support and your continued confidence in the Ohio Dairy Producers Association as we work hard to build a stronger dairy industry for Ohio's dairy farmers. Let me start by setting the record straight. Many of you see me and my team out and about serving dairy farmers, and you'll often see us talking about dairy promotion. We have a relationship and a partnership between the American Dairy Association and the Ohio Dairy Producers Association, but I want to make something very clear. The marketing and promotion efforts, which are your checkoff program, are functions of the American Dairy Association. No checkoff dollars are allowed to be used for regulation or policy engagement. All of that needs to be done through the trade association, which is funded solely by dairy farmer memberships and other organizations who support that trade association. And the time that is spent by myself or our consultants or our staff that is engaging in legislative and regulatory activity are billed to the Ohio Dairy Producers Association, and the board of directors for ODPA reimburses the American Dairy Association for the time and expenses that we incur to implement any legislative and regulatory activity. So to put it very bluntly, dairy promotion can go so far, but where dairy checkoff ends, the Ohio Dairy Producers Association begins. And that's what I want to focus on today. The Ohio Dairy Producers Association is your voice of Ohio's dairy farmers in the state of Ohio, and we work collaboratively with our trade associations throughout the United States to engage with National Milk Producers Association at the federal level. In Ohio, we work very closely with the Ohio Department of Agriculture, the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Natural Resources, and as you know, Lake Erie has been in the forefront. We're working really closely with the Lake Erie Commission to make sure Ohio's dairy farmers' voices are heard and that the information about the farm practices that dairy farmers implement to keep the nutrients in our fields and keep that information front and center for those state agencies. We also work very aggressively through the Ohio House and Senate and the US House and Senate. And like I said, we collaborate with ag industry on issues that affect dairy industry. What are we voicing? We're voicing our opinion on legislative affairs and regulatory activity. We advocate for you. We support or oppose federal and state trade policies and proposals that come forward. We activate our boards and we make those decisions, and then we customize and provide testimony, and we activate our membership to be voices specifically. Where I may not be the only voice, we will have dairy farmers and board members engage with your legislators and your state policy and regulatory staff. We're very honored to have the partnerships that we formed over the years through our milk marketing cooperatives, our trade associations that function and serve dairy farmers in the state. We're honored to be a member of National Milk Producers Federation, and we work very closely with them on federal policy. Our commodity organizations, I spend a great deal of time working with beef, pork, poultry, lamb, corn, and wheat and soy, as well as the Ohio Federation of Soil and Water, Ohio Agribusiness Association, the Grocers Association, and even the Restaurant Association, where I was on the call this morning for 30 minutes dealing with some regulatory challenges where dairy was going to be negatively impacted. And we're rallying those folks to work on those policies to get them corrected. So let me just take one moment to point out to you as dairy farmers that we are the voice of Ohio's dairy farmers. We work collaboratively to deal with federal issues. Our focus this past year has been on many of the topics that you see on the slide in front of you. As you all know, we've been working very aggressively to ask our national and federal regulators to provide some flexibility within the school milk program to offer more fat variety levels. We've been challenged in working on imitation dairy labeling. We all know that that's nonsense, and that the federal labeling should be changed so that the imitation dairy products cannot call themselves milk or cheese or yogurt or any other things. Those rules need to be changed, and we're working very closely with national milk producers on that. But I want to point out that we've been spending most of our time on water quality and nutrient management, and those issues are both national as well as local. They come to rest here in Ohio as we make sure that we sit at the table with the ag organizations to make sure that the voice of dairy farmers are heard. Over the last year and a half, I've worked very effectively with the Ohio Environmental Council and our environmental community to get them to understand the value of what dairy farmers do on your farms every day to retain the nutrients in your fields and keep them there to be able to nourish the products, the crops that we harvest every year to feed Americans and our cattle, which also feed our population and consumers. So the nutrient management programs that we've been working on, we established something brand new, a collaborative initiative of the Ohio Ag Conservation Initiative, which brings together the environmental community, the conservation community, and all the ag organizations to make sure that we have a stronger voice in educating farmers about what great best management practices we can implement, maybe even identify some continuous improvement practices, but more importantly, to gather data, protect that data, and then use that information to proactively share with consumers the great efforts that we take to make sure that the nutrients stay in our fields, to raise the crops, and not be moving into our waterways. We all care about having safe waters and clear waters, clean waters. We are committed to the same things, and we formed a partnership to do that. There are many things that I could share with you, but we don't have time to do it all. But I want to wrap up by saying this. I don't do it alone. The board of directors hired Jen Lynch from the Remington Road Group, and she works very closely with me in the State House and working with our legislators and our regulatory folks to help make sure that the dairy farmers' voice is heard. And I'm very honored to be able to work with Jen Lynch on an ongoing basis. She's been a great addition to our team, and our board of directors really appreciate her efforts. So with that, I would simply say that while I can't possibly cover everything in the few minutes I shared with you, I want to encourage all of you to keep watch of what's going on through the trade association, your trade association, and encourage you to visit odpa.org. We encourage you to help us increase our membership, because every dairy farm can join this organization for just $60 and have the benefits of being a part of the voice representing over 1,700 dairy farmers in the state of Ohio. One last thing. We have an event scheduled for September 11th. We're encouraging you to help us recruit folks to come and golf. Participation in the golf outing generates revenue that can be used for policy and regulatory activities of the Ohio Dairy Producers Association. So even if you don't golf, I encourage you to help recruit a foursome, or come and participate and have some fun and engage with those companies that service us as a dairy industry, and participate in raising a few dollars, have some fun, but more importantly, collaborate and bring as many folks as you can. Again, I want to wrap up my comments by thanking our sponsors for today's event, and really appreciate all of you for your contributions to our organization and for your ongoing service. With that, I'm going to close my presentation, and I want to transition quickly, because I really want to spend all of our time today through till 1 o'clock with our keynote speakers. Let me start with Mike McCulley. Mike McCulley he owns the McCulley Group. It's a firm that provides strategic consulting services to dairy and food companies. Client projects include business analysis, procurement, supply chain strategies, market research, and commodity risk management. Mike McCulley also has provided subject matter expertise for global consulting companies, private equity firms, and Wall Street investments. Mike has spoken at numerous conferences around the world. And Mike has worked for over 15 years at Kraft Foods, where he held management roles in dairy, meat, grain, and purchasing. As you can see, Mike has a great span of knowledge and information, and I'm delighted to have him join us today. I'm going to turn the screen over to Mike and allow him to begin his presentation. I encourage all of you to listen closely, attentively, and be sure to ask your questions, as Aaron pointed out, participating and asking him questions so that he can address them at the end. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I will turn the platform over to Mike. Mike?
Thank you, Scott. Good morning. Appreciate the introduction and the opportunity to be here, or at least virtually, with you today. What I want to do is give you just a little background on, let me pull the presentation up. Give you a little background on kind of where we're at here with the dairy markets today, as well as an outlook into 2021. And I would say, just in general, this is probably the most challenging times we've had in terms of trying to forecast. I was on a call a few days ago, and a joke was made about how long-range planning is now 4 weeks, and I'm like, it was actually probably more like 4 days a few months ago. And I think it's interesting just to step back and say, where have we been? We're only midway through July. It's barely 6 months into the year, and it seems like it's been 5 years. I mean, think back to January is when we had the first news out of China with the lockdown in Wuhan and the provinces there. And it seemed like that was a long ways away from the U.S. and we really didn't think too much of it. But by the time we got into mid-March and into the hoarding phase, if any of you went to grocery stores, you experienced long lines, maybe out the door. The whole issues with shortages of toilet paper is something we'll be talking about for years. And that was really kind of the hoarding phase. Then we got into really, I'd say for dairy, the darkest days of the year. Was that first several weeks of April, when all of a sudden that demand came crashing down, and a lot of milk was dumped around the country, really at an unprecedented level, and lots of supply chain issues from farms all the way through to grocery stores. And again, it seems like a long time ago, but we had cheese prices down at $1 and butter prices down close to that. But then since that point, things have gotten better. We've slowly reopening economies around the U.S., around the world. You've had a fair bit of government activity, whether it's overall stimulus packages, and then obviously a lot on dairy, which I know Jim's going to talk about. And thing that's is just amazing. Like I said, you go back not even 90 days ago, cheese prices were $1. On Monday they were $3. We'll talk a little about that. I think, to me, I still catch myself and say that, you have to keep in mind that we are in a recession in the U.S. and a global recession, and probably one it's going to be pretty serious, and we don't know how long it's going to last. And then there's the obvious uncertainty of how much are we going to see more shutdowns, and we've seen some of that here this week of things going in reverse. And the picture I put up here on the far right hand side is actually the United Terminal in Chicago from late June. It was the first and only time I've flown since middle of March. And that's 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. That's not 1 o'clock in the morning. There was virtually no one there, no one through security. And I came back from that trip thinking that things are not very good. And I'm generally an optimistic person, but not feeling very good about where the economy, particularly some segments of it, are going. As we focus on dairy in terms of demand, it's been really a mixed story since back in March. On the retail side, at grocery, dairy products have done great. That's been the positive here. The negative has been food service. And you go back at the bottom in April, my estimates and other estimates had total dairy demand probably down 10% or so. And as a result, that was, pushed that milk back into the farm and onto the ground. And that was probably the best thing for it to happen, even though it's a bad thing. It's probably the best thing to happen because really didn't need to make product when there wasn't any demand for it. So if you look at the graph I've got on the lower part of the page here, shows those 2 peak weeks of hoarding in late March. Total dairy retail sales, this is on a dollar basis, was up 55% versus a year ago. And that's, again, just unheard of to see that sort of surge in buying. Now, since that time, it's fallen basically by half for a couple months. But the thing that's probably should be a little more concerning is where we're at right now, and here in the last month or so and going forward. And in the last bullet point, I note, if you look at where volumes were by mid-June, this is in a total volume basis now, cheese retail sales were up 12%. That's versus 29% from the middle of March to the middle of June. So we're definitely seeing a slowdown in cheese. Still up. I mean, let's not gloss over that. It's still up 12%. That was a good thing, but things are going to continue to slow there. Fluid milk, a little more concern. Had 11% growth in that couple month period. And the middle of June, down 0.1%. Butter, still big numbers here, but again, a big slowdown from where it had been. As we look forward, $3 cheese is good on the milk check. $3 cheese is not good when it comes to demand and on the grocery stores. So I know we're already seeing some pushback at the wholesale level, and I think you're going to see these high prices flow through to retail. It's going to see some slowdowns. I don't think it's going to turn negative on cheese or butter, but I think it's definitely going to be slow down from where it has been. Fluid milk's the bigger concern. I've talked to several fluid milk bottlers this week, and particularly out west in California, in the next couple months where Class 1 prices are going to be, we're looking at what they're saying, conventional milk prices at the store could be as much or maybe even more than organic milk. And that's going to be very negative for demand. So look for what that means is more class one milk. That we're just going to see some losses of sales there, and that's going to get pushed back into manufacturing outlets. So something to watch out for here over the next couple of months as we talk about forecasts, why I'm not terribly bullish as we get later this year. In terms of overall dairy prices, this is, I don't know if it's a classic V-shaped recovery, but if you look at the cheese market, you see that, for those of us that live through this on a day-to-day basis back in April, prices on block and barrel cheese fell to the lowest level they've been since back in 2000, and butter was down at $1.10. Now, fortunately, it didn't stay there very long. On the butter side, cream multiples were at all-time lows, to even in the point of being dumped in some points, which is again unheard of. But by mid-July, this Monday, cheese prices had tripled to $3. Got a new record high set this Monday at $3. That's the first time ever above $3. And the new record high is not just a little above the prior record, it's more than 20% higher than the prior record set back in 2014. The prior block market average or record high was in the mid 240s, and now we're at $3. We were at $3 on Monday. Now it has dropped down to 271 as of yesterday, and probably got another 20 cents or so drop to come, but still strong demand. I think we're going to see prices, in my estimation, we talk about outlook, cheese prices probably stay above $2 out through September. So that's positive. Butter, not as exciting. We've got one day over $2 and then falling back. Right now, the butter market's kind of $1.70, $1.75, give or take a dime or so. And I think it probably stays that way. A lot of stocks in butter, a lot of stocks in milk powder, probably going to keep any big rallies from occurring. So as we look at on milk prices, the class 3 milk price, like I said, hit the lowest point since back in September 2009. Those were not good days. But since that point, class 3 milk prices have doubled for July, up over $24. So again, big numbers here. But it causes a bit of a problem because now the spread between class 3 and 4 is historically wide. Not if you go back early this year, you can see $1 or $1.75 spread between class 3 and class 4. Now we're looking at an $8 spread happened in June. We're looking over $10 in July, back $8, $9 in August, and continuing on out in more moderate out into the fourth quarter. What that means is now what is the top of mind for dairy farmers around the country is negative PPDs. And for June milk, when the checks hit here in July, huge negative PPDs, ones that have never been seen before. And I know dairy farmers don't like to see a negative 20-cent PPD. They really don't like seeing negative 5 or 6 or 7 PPD. And in the Central Valley, California, I guess think you got it bad. Central Valley, California is going to see the largest negative PPD of minus 841 per hundredweight. So the blend price in the Central Valley of Tulare County is 1260 something. So again, just historic in terms of these sort of spreads. And this is going to raise a lot of people's blood pressure and will for the next couple of months because the July milk will be probably this something similar, maybe not as big, but the PPD is a timing issue, and it will come back as cheese prices drop. The class 1 price lag that will come back. So it's a different discussion, I think, as we get out into the fall as we get through the noise in the cheese market. So, and that's kind of a good segue to the next page. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I think what I've thought and the number of people I've talked to has shown that the volatility over the last several months has exposed some flaws in the dairy pricing system. And in particular, the dairy industry has relied on the CME spot market for price discovery for a long time. And I use the first bullet point, I use some comparisons here to Europe and New Zealand to what the US has experienced just in the last 3 months or so. And again, you look at the US, the range of cheese prices from $1 to $3, Europe, $1.42 to $1.65, New Zealand, $1.60 to $2. Is that sort of volatility healthy for the U.S. industry? Do we really need that much volatility relative to what we see in other countries or other regions? The problem that the CME market has is it's really the market of last resort. And what ends up happening is the marginal loaded product sets the price for all the products in the market, not only cheese or butter, but even class 2 milk and class 1 milk. So I've thought this for a long time. I think the industry needs to transition to some sort of price discovery system that reflects the average of all transactions and not just that last load up or down. You know, one example, if any of you are familiar with grain marketing and how grain markets work, you basically have a basis off of a futures contract. I think there's a role here for USDA that could do daily price reporting like it does in other livestock markets. The other thing I'll mention, and this is by no means any consensus around this, but I think also some of the milk price volatility is exacerbated by using the CME-based commodity prices into the federal milk marketing order formulas, which are largely these, which are the product price formulas. And 20 some years ago, late 90s, is when the industry decided to move to product price formulas to value milk. I think there needs to be a serious discussion around that, whether that's really the best way to price milk or whether we can do something different. I think that, in my mind, the industry needs to transition to a more market-oriented system that better reflects the value of milk used in all products, not just the 4 commodity products, because what we end up with is when we use these commodity products in these formulas, we end up with commodity milk prices, which by definition are usually relatively low. So I think that's also a discussion we need to have is, how do you make sure that that happens? And as I say in the last point, make sure that we incentivize production of value-added products where there in values more risk being taken to give more reward. Right now we have a system that really does incentivize the customer, the production of these commodity products, where you have really a low risk, low reward system. So we end up with these, like I said, commodity milk prices. So a lot to be said about this. I know Jim and his team and a lot of others around the country are going to be looking at this or have been looking at this. There's a lot more to do here, but this is historically a very tough area to make any progress on, because there's usually very little consensus. As I wrap up here, before we get into some questions and answers, I wanted to give you just my outlook, I guess, as far as the rest of this year, as well as out to 2021. I think milk supplies are going to return to expansion once farmers start seeing these higher milk prices. That's going to take a bit, as we talked about the negative PPDs. We're probably out into Q3, later in Q3, August, September, before we see those higher milk prices hit. I think the June milk production number that comes out next Tuesday will show probably something close to flat versus year ago. I think once we get into the July, August, September numbers, probably flat to 1% growth, probably a little better growth, maybe a 1 to 2% growth as we get out into the fourth quarter. Next year, something pretty close to average, maybe 1.5%. If you look at my cheese price and butter and non-fat and milk prices, they're all fairly average, this is pretty close to average, I would say, for next year. So, $16 milk, give or take a little. And I think that's, again, at some point, we've got to step back and look at where the economic environment is. It's not necessarily positive, and actually more directly negative. Recessions are typically negative for raw material demand in general, and dairy is not immune to that. The last thing I'll add, which I think is, it's an interesting point. Over the last 20 years, when corn prices are under $4, class 3 milk has been under $17 in all years except for one, and that was 2007. And actually 2020 will mark only the second year since 2000 where we've had cheap corn but higher priced milk. So I think we revert back to more of an average or more normal relationship next year. And again, if you are following the corn prices, I see December futures, I think this morning were $3.40. I think we got a nice bit of rain here. Hopefully you got some here in the last couple of days. That the eastern corn belt's been a bit dry, so hopefully that helps out the corn through pollination. We get a good corn crop, big stocks, kind of iffy demand when it comes to ethanol. And in my estimation, we could be under $3 by this fall on corn. What that means is cheap feed, or cheaper feed, and that's, I think, by definition, would result in a little downward pressure on milk prices just from that standpoint. So I'm not forecasting $18 and $20 milk next year. I think we're in a more moderate or average sort of price environment. So,
well, with that, Mike, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. Thank you for taking time to share with us your insights, your knowledge, and your visions, and really look forward to working with you. I will share with this group today that the Ohio Dairy Producers Association Board of Directors this morning had a conversation about Mike's services, and he's going to be asked to provide us guidance and insights as we look ahead at the future of milk pricing, and we'll be getting to engage him on those conversations next month. So more to come on that, and Mike, we look forward to working with you on that. At this time, I'd like to draw your attention.
Thank you very much, Scott.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it. At this time, I'd like to draw your attention to our next speaker, who needs no introduction. I've known Jim Mulhern since the beginning of my career at the dairy industry back in 1984. I've watched Jim transition from multiple roles, and he's always been an advocate for dairy farmers. And we're just very fortunate to have him in the leadership role as CEO of the National Milk Producers Federation. So Jim, you need no additional introduction. I'm going to turn it over to you. We look forward to your presentation, sir.
Great, thanks very much, Scott. Can you hear me?
We can.
Let me find my presentation here, and let's see where it went. There we go. See if I can get this up there. It's a little bulky. Great, can you see it now? Thank you, Scott, for that introduction. And more importantly, thank you for the invitation to be with you today. I wish we could all do this in person, but it is an honor and frankly a privilege for me to have a chance to join you for your virtual annual meeting. And I need to start with a word of thanks to you, Scott, and to your team, not only for your membership and engagement in National Milk Producers Federation, but for your ongoing work with us on all those policy issues that you talked about in your opening remarks today. The leadership that you provide and that ODPA provides for the Ohio dairy industry is incredibly important to the work that we do. The connection you have to your Ohio congressional delegation in the House and Senate has been very, very helpful in raising the profile of dairy issues in the state of Ohio to be much more on the radar screen for your delegation. And I can tell you, having worked on dairy policy for many, many years, the degree to which the Ohio congressional delegation is focused on and engaged in dairy issues is much greater today and has been for the last several years than it used to be, many, many years ago. And that's a tribute to the great work that all of you, the staff, but also you as members, doing outreach in connecting with your elected representatives. It's very, very helpful. And it's been very helpful in getting some of the, making progress in some of the issues that I want to talk about this morning. Mike McCully did a great job laying out the situation that led to where we are today and many of the factors in the marketplace. I want to talk a little bit about the policy developments we've gone through during this period. You go back to early March when Mike was talking about the period when we first started the lockdown, the stay-at-home orders, essentially shutting down much of the U.S. economy nationwide and really much of the world's economy in order to address the incredible challenge of this pandemic, something we haven't seen in any of our lifetimes, the first time in 100 years since we've had to deal with a worldwide pandemic of this nature. And we were meeting, the NMPF board was meeting here in Washington just before this all hit us. It was early March. We were trying to decide, our chairman, Randy Mooney, and I were talking back and forth over the course of the week. Do we go ahead with the meeting? Do we cancel it? We decided at that point to plow ahead. We were fortunate enough to get our meeting in the first week in March. That next week is when everything pretty much shut down. And when we were meeting, when the board was meeting, we were discussing what could happen. It was clear that this was going to get worse, not better. And we didn't know the magnitude of it at that point, but we knew there were going to be huge challenges. So we did talk at our early March board meeting about what might be necessary as this unfolded. And then when we got into later in March, it became clearer as stay-at-home orders went into effect across the country. It was clear this was going to have a serious potential negative impact on our industry. That's why we went to work with the Congress in mid-March and through to the end of March to try to make sure that the impact of this coronavirus on our industry could be ameliorated somewhat through federal support. When Congress passed that CARES Act in late March, we were successful in getting language into that bill, which included dairy among 4 agricultural areas for special focus by USDA. And it was that bill that passed in late March, the first one on the screen here now, the CARES Act, which provided $9.5 billion of assistance to agricultural producers for direct payments. And dairy, again, was one of the 4 areas targeted for that assistance. That was because we could see as the food service industry was shutting down across the country, as restaurants closed, as airlines, as hotels, as hospitality, as schools, all closed. It was going to have a huge impact on our industry because almost, not quite, but nearly 50%, about 40–45% of total dairy sales go into the food service market. So it's hugely important to us. And Mike talked about that impact. We were looking in March, early April, at the possibility of having 10% too much milk produced in this country this year. And we know what 1 or 2% too much milk can do to price. The shock of what a 10% excess production would do was incredibly damaging. That's why we worked closely with our membership in National Milk Producers Federation, had several calls with our executive committee to formulate a proposal to take forward once this CARES Act had passed, and then worked with IDFA, the processor group, to come to USDA with a joint program. But the legislative response, I just want to hit this slide. I'm not going to go through all of the things there, but it's important to recognize that there has been a robust, strong response from the Congress and the administration to deal with this situation. And it is this series of bills that have been passed and acted that have provided support, that have helped not only the dairy industry and all of agriculture, but really the entire U.S. economy. Things would be much worse today if we hadn't had this intervention of the federal government on a number of areas. There are 4 separate pieces of legislation listed here. All of them have had some impact on our industry, directly through the CARES Act on the direct payment program, the Paycheck Protection Program, but also nutrition program funding that's been provided in other legislation. So we've got to be very thankful for the prompt action. And I'm going to, later in my comments, I'll talk about one more bill that might be coming through the Congress yet this year. But after Congress passed that CARES Act, we went to work with USDA to make sure that we could get a program that would address the needs and concerns in the dairy industry. And that shutdown in food service was having a huge impact, backing up production, shifting supply chains, resulting in the dumping of milk that Mike pointed to in his remarks, and that all of you are well aware of because we saw it happening nationwide. We tried to scramble to reorient those supply chains, but it meant that our co-ops had a lot of milk backed up on them, and that's why that milk got dumped. We had, contracts to send milk to cheese plants, some of which had even shut down. Those processors that had, 75% of the business being food service, they didn't have a market for their product. A lot of them cut back their production or even some shut down entirely for a period of time. That sent that milk back on us, and that resulted in some of the dumping. But the quick response of this industry, which Mike referenced, has been incredibly important to deal with what could have been a disastrous situation. The co-op base plans that went into effect across the country did throttle back milk production. We were in a growing production mode. We went through the last 4 or 5 years of really challenging milk prices. Things started to get better in 2019. 2019 was the best year we've had since 2014, and we were hoping to go into 2020 for better prices and better market conditions. The dairy herd was building, production was building, and then the coronavirus hit. So the record turnaround with the base plans throttling back on milk production, we went in a very, very short time from experiencing a year-over-year growth in milk production late last year, the first part of this year, of about 2.5% was the year-over-year increase in production. It quickly turned around with the base plans going into effect and some of the milk that got dumped. We went quickly to a negative 1% growth in milk production. So an actual contraction over year ago levels this spring, which was critically important to helping get our supply chain back into a better balance. Now, we worked hard on USDA to get the coronavirus food assistance program workable for dairy. It took a lot of work. There was a lot of stuff there in April, during the month of April, that continued on even when USDA made their initial announcement on April 17th. We kept working on the department to make improvements in that package so that by the final announcement in the middle of May, on May 19th, was the final announcement of the package. We had a overall assistance package, which we felt was very important to our industry and very helpful. I don't need to spend a lot of time on the numbers. You all know those, but the direct payments, the combined payments of $6.20 on first quarter milk production has been incredibly important for our industry. The ability for all milk production to be enrolled in the program, irrespective of whether some of that milk is in other various risk management programs, from DRP to LGM to even DMC, all of those, that alphabet soup of programs, all the milk from Q1 was able to be enrolled in the program with payments initially of 80% of that $6.20 on Q1 production, with 20% being held back to see if USDA has enough money when they do all of the direct payments to producers across the country for all commodities that are eligible. Another important feature of this was that producers could get coverage on more than just their milk production up to certain levels. And so dairy cattle were also eligible for payments. That has been helpful as well. The program is still open, so sign-up has been robust so far. I'll show those numbers in a second, but you still have until the end of August to sign up for the program. Now, we did have a number of concerns, and we've tried to address as many of these as we could through the process. Payment limit initially proposed by USDA when Secretary Perdue announced this program in mid-April was $125,000. That was going to be a huge problem for our industry because we knew the damages to many of our producers was going to be well in excess of $125,000. And we made the argument strongly to USDA and on Capitol Hill that this was disaster assistance. This is not a farm bill program where there are payment limits set for public policy reasons. This is disaster assistance, and there weren't payment limits on assistance to the airlines or the hotels or other parts of the economy. So we really felt a need to get this issue addressed. We put a lot of pressure on the Hill. We got a lot of support in Congress, and we had our colleagues in other parts of agriculture joining with us to do this. When the final program was announced, that payment limit was raised to $250,000 per entity with some exceptions. I'll touch on those in a second. There also is an overall limitation on on adjusted gross income. That does put a limit on, but the provision is the AGI limit of $900,000 applies unless 75% or more of the individual's income is from farming. So it does improve that AGI limit some, but it is still a problem for some producers. There are a few other issues that we had concerns on, but by and large, we have been pleased with USDA's implementation of the program. Now, I mentioned the payment limitations. There are some special rules that I mentioned. If you have an LLC or limited partnership or an S Corp, the limit is $500,000 if there are 2 shareholders, and up to $750,000 with 3 or more shareholders in an operation. So the overall limit is $750,000 as long as those shareholders contribute substantial amounts of labor or management to the operation. We still have some concerns about the provisions that impact these payment limits. Trusts, for example, are limited to 1 payment. We're still working with USDA to try to get more flexibility in this area, and are strongly encouraging greater flexibility. If it's not addressed administratively, we'll still be pushing, asking Congress to help in subsequent legislation. So when we look at where we are to date with payments through, I think this announcement was on Monday of this week, we have total payments to dairy producers throughout the country, throughout the U.S. of $1.2 billion to just over 20,000 dairy operations that have signed up to date. Again, the sign-up period is still open, so producers are eligible to still enter into the program, and we're strongly encouraging producers to do so. The numbers on Ohio that USDA has released indicate that just over $34 million has been paid to producers, dairy farmers in Ohio, to a total of 774 dairy operations that have signed up in Ohio. So this assistance has clearly provided a benefit across the country. I think that $34 million is just under $50,000 average payment to Ohio producers, and obviously there's a wide range, so some are getting much more than that and some under that on the smaller operations. Our estimate right now is that the direct payments will total just under $2 billion in this first round of CFAP payments. We do think that USDA will provide the 20% that has been held back, so more should be coming when all is said and done. It looks like there's enough money in CFAP at this point to make those payments. Again, there'll be subsequent legislation we think that will pass the Congress. So if the 20% is somehow not available after the final accounting, we may be able to get Congress to provide more. But our sense right now is the 20% will come through. The other important part of this program that I want to spend just a couple minutes on is the food box program. We felt, recognizing that there was a good chance that there would be payment limits on this program, we knew that it would be equally important to provide not just the direct assistance to producers, but help the marketplace by getting USDA in the market to buy product, not to store it and put it back onto the commercial market in the future, but to buy it and put it into food banks and immediate food distribution programs. Because of the huge increase in unemployment as a result of this pandemic, there were millions and millions of families in need of this food. And we felt it was very important that there be an expanded effort to provide this kind of assistance. Congress put language into the CARES Act to provide funding for direct purchases. We worked very hard to get USDA to put substantial funds into dairy purchases. So we're pleased when USDA announced a total of $3 billion available for the purchase of dairy, meat, and fresh produce from that CARES Act funding. and the breakdown initially was $1 billion for each of those three areas: $1 billion for dairy, $1 billion for meat, and $1 billion in produce. When in mid-April, when USDA announced this program, they said that it'd be $100 million a month for dairy purchases. We felt that that number was too low. You go back to mid-April, we had a lot of product on the market, a lot of displaced product from food service that was available. That was depressing. That's why we got to $1 a pound on cheese, and the lower prices on butter and across the board. So I was urging USDA to do much more robust purchases in this first round. When the program was finally announced, they upped that $100 million a month to almost $320 billion in the first round of dairy purchases, the period from the middle of May to the end of June. The awards that USDA accepted provided up to $317 million in total purchases, with a focus on fluid milk, cheese, yogurt, but also butter and other products have been purchased for this program. The estimated total in this first round of awards was about 510 million pounds of dairy products being purchased. That was a significant part of why we saw the V-shaped recovery that Mike showed on the one slide, where milk prices in the spring tanked down to that $1 a pound on cheese. And then after USDA started buying product, after the base programs went into effect and cut back on milk production, and after some of the food service demand started to pick up, that's when we saw milk prices rising dramatically. And while many of us, if you remember in early April, mid-April, people were hoping that we could have a V-shaped recovery for the entire US economy. Hasn't happened. I didn't think it would, because I thought this would be a much more prolonged situation that we'd be dealing with. But we have had a V-shaped recovery in dairy. One of the few, if not the only area in the entire US economy that has seen that kind of rapid rebound. The challenge is going to be to keep it there. And I don't think we're going to see prices stay at this level. And Mike alluded to that with his presentation. But we do think they'll stay much higher than they would have without the assistance that's been provided. The second round of awards, we're now into that period, from July 1 to the end of August, with another $1 billion purchases being done by USDA, with about $300 million in additional dairy purchases, exclusive dairy boxes, and dairy is also part of another almost $450 million in combined purchases. So there will be more dairy being purchased through this period. That is helping keep these prices at a higher level than they would be without this. So this federal assistance has been critically important to our industry, and we're seeing broader distribution being done in the second round of program. There were some problems in the first round. They're trying to address those here in the second round. In addition to the CARES program purchases, USDA has also been in the market with Section 32 purchases and some of the trade mitigation purchases. So in addition to everything I've talked about, USDA year to date has also purchased $134 million worth of fluid milk, cheese, butter, and non-fat dry milk, and some yogurt as part of Section 32 and the trade mitigation payments. All of this together has been very helpful in seeing the boost in milk prices that we've experienced. Now, what we don't want to see is a W-shaped situation where we went down, we've risen dramatically. We don't want to get back down and have that tremendous volatility which we've seen in the past. So we're urging USDA to not overbuy, but be in the market if needed in the third and fourth quarter. The need is going to be there from food banks for this product. So we're encouraging the department to stay vigilant, keep flexible to be able to buy product. We don't need to see cheese at $3 a pound because, to Mike's comments, as great as that is from a producer milk check standpoint, it can kill demand, and we don't need that. The other point I would make here is we need to keep in mind as an industry that some of the recovery that we have seen is a result of these USDA purchases. Had the department, had the government not been in the marketplace, we would be seeing milk nowhere near the prices we're seeing today. And so while they're elevated, and it's been a result of this, we're still have to keep an eye on that marketplace for next year and beyond. So what we always see when prices rise, producers add more cows and milk production increases. We do not need a big increase in milk production at this point. I think, and you saw it from Mike's projections, his outlook for next year echoes that of other economists. We're going to get back into this roller coaster. If milk production increases dramatically in response to these prices, we could have problems next year, because some of the demand we're getting is a creation of these purchases for the food bank programs. Now, Congress is working on additional legislation. The House did pass the HEROES Act in late June. We got provisions in there for additional farm payments that would include dairy in them for second quarter impact of the COVID-19 on markets. There is language in there for a direct dairy donation program, which could be very important, and we're working with the Senate now to advance this legislation through the process. So there is the prospect of additional legislation coming forward. What that's going to look like exactly remains to be seen. The Senate bill is going to be different than the House bill. Hopefully they get this worked out when they come back in next week. And they've got about a 2-week period, 2-3-week period to get a bill done before the August recess begins. We're hopeful that we can get legislation approved in this next congressional work period coming up. I'm going to wrap up with a couple more slides here just to cover other areas that we've been heavily engaged in. So beyond all of the work at USDA, when we saw the provisions for the Small Business Administration on the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, we wanted to make sure that we could get assistance for our producers and for our industry from these programs. And we worked very hard to make sure that dairy producers and dairy processors would be eligible for PPP and EIDL assistance. And these programs have been very, very helpful. Many of you probably have, hopefully have filed for the PPP or the EIDL program and gotten support from those. There are some issues we're still trying to work on. We have an issue on PPP where sole proprietors have not been eligible for assistance. We're trying to get that addressed, and in this next legislation that I just talked about in the previous slide, that issue may be addressed as well. But collectively, this federal response has been very, very helpful for us, and has taken what could have been a catastrophic situation and made it much, much better as we look forward to the balance of the year. Let me end my comments with just a pivot here to one other slide, because it is a issue that is very important to our industry, one that we've worked long and hard to address, and Scott referenced this in his comments. Many of you may be aware the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee issued its report just yesterday. We covered the report there, was on the right side of your screen. And this is something we've been working on for some time. These are the guidelines that are issued every 5 years by the federal government. So the last time the Dietary Guidelines for Americans were released was 2015. And it is very important what these guidelines say, the advice they provide to American consumers on the role of various foods in our diet. And dairy has long had a strong position in the dietary guidelines. We've had a number of issues we've had to work on to address over the years. It's an ongoing process. Our industry is well united in these efforts. The guidelines that came out reflect a lot of the work that we've put into them on a number of key issues, where dairy is very well positioned in these guidelines in many, many ways. The importance of nutrient-rich dairy foods as part of healthy eating patterns across all lifespans, starting from birth to the senior years. Dairy is included in every one of those food groups as a important food for healthy eating patterns. We've been able to maintain the 3 servings of dairy a day in most of the food patterns that are in 2 of the 3 food patterns. It is 3 servings a day. In the Mediterranean pattern, it is 2 servings a day. So this has been important to keep the emphasis on adequate consumption of dairy in the diet. The guidelines highlight the importance of dairy in a number of positive health outcomes. And that's been critical. We've got strong recognition in these guidelines for the important role of dairy in the diet. One of the areas that we worked, this is an ongoing effort. It's going to continue until this ship gets righted. But is the issue of fat and milk fat in particular. There was a big push in these guidelines to reduce the recommended calories from saturated fat from the current guidance of 10% down to 7%. And that would have been a huge problem for us. And this is despite a mounting evidence that's been building for several years of the positive or neutral role of milk fat in a number of health outcomes. So we've been pushing the committee. I sent a letter just 3 weeks ago, I guess it was, along with Michael Dykes, my counterpart at IDFA, sent a letter to HHS and USDA, Secretary Perdue and Secretary Azar, to encourage them to keep the focus and to the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee to keep the focus on this positive research on milk fat. I will say that despite the fact that they did not increase this level, the committee did acknowledge that there is emerging research raising questions, at least, this is my language, not theirs, but raising questions on the guidance on saturated fats. So they did call for additional review and research on the role of different components, different providers of fat, and mentioning dairy in this context on health outcomes. So I think the key to remember is it took a long time. This effort, the anti-fat crusade in this country, started in the 1950s. And it took 30 years for it to build to the point that it got embedded firmly in US dietary guidance. And it is now starting to turn around. We've been working now for the better part of really, it's been 10 years. In the 2010 guidelines, we started a strong effort to turn that around because research was mounting in our favor. It got better in 2015, and the research continues to build a very positive, neutral to positive story on the role of milk fat in the diet. So we are going to get this turned around. We will get it done. It's just gonna take time because we have a lot of groups out there that are pushing a contrary message, and a lot of organizations have put a lot of they've staked their entire reputation on this issue. So I want to just let all of you know that while we've got progress, there are many good things in this report, many things for us to build on to solidify the importance of increased dairy consumption in the US diet. We're going to keep working on the milk fat issue, and we are going to get that turned around. Scott, I went around longer than I had planned to. I hope I didn't take up too much time. I'm happy to respond to any questions on anything I covered or anything else, or if you want to save questions to the end, whatever you want to do, I'm yours.
All right. Well, first of all, I think everybody that's observing this webinar and this annual meeting can realize just how much information you've shared and what a tremendous accomplishment that the dairy industries have made in working with our federal government during this very unusual crisis. And Jim, you did a great job giving us a recap of the financial support that you were instrumental in helping to the USDA folks and our government officials to understand the need that's out there. You know, I'd just like to make one point, Jim. you know, as we watch the food box program develop, as part of our communications, even in Ohio with our governor and others, is these dollars that are being used to purchase food is not a direct payment to our farmers. This is to feed hungry families in a crisis that we're in right now. And I think it's imperative to make sure that we continue that message that these dollars are not going to farmers. They're being used to purchase the product, which we would hope would trickle down and benefit our farmers because of the keeping dairy products moving. And when it didn't have a home in food service, and it didn't, and there wasn't enough there wasn't enough to be able to buy it all at retail, we had to feed hungry families through the food banks.
Yep.
And just to complement your message there, in Ohio, we were successful in leveraging our relationship with our governor, and we were successful in getting $1 million allocated to the food banks through the governor's budget.
Yep.
So we were, and we've seen that expenditure already occur through June 30th. So in addition to the national dollars, the federal dollars, our state gave $1 million to help buy dairy products from Ohio's dairy processors. So, and if there are any questions, Erin?
Yep, we have one question from Susan Mykrantz. She asks, or she says, I have read comments that DMI is satisfied with the guidelines as presented. Your comments indicate that you aren't satisfied with those guidelines and are pushing for more change. Is this a mixed message?
No, it's a great question, and I appreciate the opportunity to address that. Let me emphasize that there is a lot of very positive stuff in these guidelines. You know, we spent so much time behind the scenes. There is an incredible effort that goes on that we're engaged in ourselves directly at National Milk, working with IDFA. We get the science background from DMI to address these issues. It's a very, very close relationship, and it is that collectively has resulted in very, very positive guidance. I want to be clear that these guidelines are going to be very helpful to us as an industry going forward. I made the statement that I'm focused on the fat issue because it is a critical one. It is one that we've got to get turned around. We will get turned around. I really want to, I'm trying to emphasize none of us are patient on this. But it did take 30, 40, almost, it's been 50 years of this anti-fat guidance that is embedded in the nutrition community. The research is showing good things, but nothing changes on a dime. We're continuing to build this record. I'm pushing the issue because I wanted to ding the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee for not being more bold in looking at this research and stepping out there. Somebody's got to step out and say, yeah, you know, the guidance we've been providing to people, it's not supported by this emerging science and evidence. And we look at the research that it was based upon, it's a house of cards. So it's taking time to do that. The other part of this answer is, Scott touched on it earlier in his comments. We have two sides of the industry. My focus entirely is on policy. DMI's focus is on nutrition, research, and education as a checkoff program. They cannot get involved in policy. I use the research and the efforts that DMI is able to do a tremendous job on. I can use that in my efforts. I don't have the constraints of a checkoff program where, because it is administered and managed by USDA ultimately, because the program is protected as if you, I don't want to get into the details, but it's considered government speech when DMI engages, and this is the case for all checkoff programs. There are limits on what they can say. I don't have those constraints. So it's not a mixed message. It's just that I can be bolder in making that statement, as I did yesterday in my announcement, to say, on the one hand, the committee did a great job in highlighting the tremendous benefits of dairy. On the other hand, they should have gone further and addressed the milk fat issue. I hope that's helpful, but it's not a mixed message. It's just I have more flexibility to emphasize that negative message because I'm not part of the checkoff program, not funded by the checkoff at all.
She says
Excellent.
thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Erin.
She says thank you.
Okay. Jim, I just want to say thank you again for your presentation. I want to conclude this segment by asking you if you're willing to stick around and listen to Lisa, you're welcome to. But I want to say this, Jim, as the Ohio Dairy Producers Association, we stand ready to go shoulder to shoulder with you and continue to debunk the myths and the misinformation that's out there, and to rally behind the science that really does prove that dairy products and fat flexibility needs to be included in our diet. So we're with you. Let us know at the Ohio Dairy Producers Association what we can do. And again, thank you for explaining and differentiating between checkoff and the policy organizations that serve the dairy farmers in our United States. Okay, with that, I'm going to introduce Lisa Watson. Lisa, if you will just begin to share your screen and present. I am delighted to have you on here today. She is the Communications Officer for the Innovation for U.S. Dairy Industry as she works on the Dairy Stewardship Commitment. So Lisa, I'll let you do the defining, so I'll turn it over to you.
All right, let me see if I can share my screen. Okay.
And by the way, while she is sharing her screen, I want to share with everybody on the call, thank you all for your patience. We have 4 great speakers. I know we're going to go past 1 o'clock. So if you folks can hang with us, I'd sure appreciate if you'd give Lisa the time that she deserves to listen about what we're doing as it relates to the environmental stewardship, and then to hang around and hear Jenny Crabtree's presentation on communications to consumers. You won't be disappointed, so stick with us.
So thanks so much, Scott. Can everyone see my screen? Is that good? Can you hear me okay?
It looks great.
Okay, perfect. Actually, I'm not the communications person at the Innovation Center, Scott, but I don't mind coming behind you and correcting you. I actually work in the area of social responsibility for the Innovation Center, but there certainly is a big communication component to that. And actually, when I asked Scott about, what he wanted me to cover today, he said, well, I really want you to try and connect the dots. We got so much stuff going on. And then we proceeded to have a conversation about some of what's going on here in Ohio. And I just have to say, I was really blown away by the work that you're doing. I can't think of any part of the country that's connecting the dots any more than you guys are. And the way that you're bringing the whole chain and stakeholder groups together to find those win-win opportunities and something that can be as potentially contentious as the environment. I just think you're an inspiration to all of us. So I want to thank you for that. And we're looking forward actually to highlighting some of the work that you're doing in Ohio at a national level across our Innovation Center. So thank you for that and the work that you're doing on the Environmental Stewardship Committee, Scott. I'll try and go quickly here because I know that we're behind, but as we think about where we are today, 20 years ago, everything was kind of gauged, or over the last 20 years, on pre and post 9/11. And that's kind of how we looked at time, if you will. I think that it's kind of daunting when we think about going forward now. I think that we will gauge time and events based on pre and post COVID. And during the last 6 months or so, as Jim pointed out, there certainly have been some cracks in the system, but we've also found some strengths in the system, like our healthcare workers and like the work that many of you are doing every single day to make sure that we've got food on the tables where families need that food. And I just want to say thank you for all the work that you're doing for people across the country in that regard. We were tracking consumer trends before COVID. We do that, routinely, really, to try and help us in our planning efforts to make sure that we've got doing the right things to prepare for a viable industry going forward. But we've also been doing that over the last, 5 or 6 months. And I think we had anticipated that we'd see some big changes in those trends, but actually what we've seen is an acceleration and a focus on trends that we had been observing prior to COVID. The bottom line when it comes to some of the things that you see here on this slide, like climate or workforce or food insecurity, our customers and consumers have an even greater expectation, I think, now in looking to our businesses to do the right thing. And so that that is really the environment that we are faced with as we go forward. The good news is U.S. Dairy has done work over the years. You know, whether we're talking about the Innovation Center or the work that Jim has led at NNPF or IDFA, I do firmly believe that we are poised for the future as we look to where we stand on some of these trends. And just a quick reminder, I don't want to take up the whole talk telling you things that you already know, but, you know, just a reminder, dairy was a leader. We were the first commodity group to conduct a life cycle assessment back in 2007. And we did it because we didn't agree with some of what was being said. And sure enough, when we did that assessment, we found that our U.S. industry only contributes about 2% of the total U.S. greenhouse gas. Around that time, shortly thereafter, dairy farmers had the foresight to create the Innovation Center. And, you know, they looked at where we stood and they said, we're going to be able to get more done if we work together. If we can bring co-ops, processors, farmers, even retailers to the table, and we can try and identify some of those win-wins, and when it falls under a pre-competitive umbrella, we're going to be able to accomplish a lot more. And that's not unlike the approach that you guys have taken in Ohio. And what that has resulted in is the development of the first industry-led, consumer-focused, social responsibility platform. That platform has evolved. The beginning of 2018, we launched the U.S. Dairy Stewardship Commitment, and that is really U.S. Dairy's social responsibility pledge against people, planet, and the community. You know, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail in the coming slides, but I think it gives us the platform to look forward and to go forward. And then just this year, we adopted the 2050 environmental stewardship goals. I think the commitment gave us the confidence to move forward in that area. And the vision of those goals is dairy as an environmental solution. And again, I'll talk more about that going forward. So, you know, again, around 2018, you know, our board said, our processors, our co-ops, our farmers are doing great work, and we've got great programs, and we're doing a lot of best practices. But if we aren't really signing on that dotted line and verifying what we're doing and reporting it, in today's age, we are not going to be where we need to be. You know, and I can tell you there has never been a more critical time for U.S. dairy, whether we're talking about our competition globally, and I can assure you that other parts of the world want the business that U.S. Dairy is delivering right now in our export program under the leadership of Secretary Vilsack. That area is growing, and our global competition doesn't like it, and they're looking for any advantage that they can take over us. Or whether we're talking about our domestic consumers, and there have never been more options for our domestic consumers when it comes to alternative dairy, alternative beverages to dairy. And so we definitely have to make sure that we can talk in these social responsibility areas and demonstrate the progress that we're making. So the stewardship commitment was launched, and it is eligible for adoption by dairy cooperatives and or processors. These are the adoption terms that an executive of the co-op or the processor actually has to sign on the dotted line. And there are specific terms. I'll just highlight two of them. In animal care, whether you are a co-op saying that you're in good standing with the farm animal care program, or a processor, you have to say, I get 100% of my milk from farms that are enrolled in farm animal care. That's one example of the commitment that has to be made. On the environment, if you're a cooperative, you have to be a participant in the Farm Environmental Stewardship Program. And that's a program that enables our co-ops to assess their greenhouse gas footprint and to identify ways that they can improve and give them suggestions to move forward to make more progress. And on the processor side, you have to enroll in the processor reporting tool. So you have to report against specific metrics, and you have to do that through a tool that the processors now have funded under the umbrella of the Innovation Center. And it's all of this work is going to allow us to aggregate information across our dairy chain on those key social responsibility priorities and allow us to hold up what U.S. dairy is doing in a concerted way. If you look at where we stand, we launched the commitment at the end of 2018. We now have about 68% of milk production represented. You can see the logos of the companies that participate right now. That milk production doesn't capture some of the brand progress that we've made. You'll see we've got General Mills, we've got Bell Brands USA, we've got Chobani. So there are some really important brands that are participating in this as well and have again signed on that dotted line. You know, given the time, I won't spend too much time. This is really another piece that we could spend a lot of time on, but it's very important, and we recognize this early on with the commitment, that we are able to respond in a global way into the expectations of our global brands. And all of those brands want to say that they are contributing to our the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that filters down to us. They say, okay, dairy, what are you doing to ensure that we are contributing to those goals? And I've circled here, I don't know if you can see it on the slide or not, but I've circled there's 7 different goals that if you are participating in the stewardship commitment as a co-op or a processor, you're contributing to 7 of those goals directly. So we think that that's really important as a draw, if you will, for to continue to build momentum in this area. The commitment and the momentum around it and the platforms that undergird that commitment for reporting have given confidence to U.S. dairy to move forward against environmental stewardship goals. So there's kind of a dotted line between the goals and the commitment, if you will. You all know that U.S. dairy has made a lot of progress over the last 1.5 years, 2 years. There have been multiple studies that have pointed to what U.S. dairy has done. And the numbers may vary slightly depending on the geographic region or the, you know, how that study was done or what the parameters were around it. But by and large, we're looking at, you know, 19–20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, give or take a few percentages, over, you know, since 2005, 2007, that general time frame. So we've definitely made a lot of progress in the environmental world. But, you know, there continue to be more and more expectations. And, you know, today our customers are looking toward moving to a carbon neutral place, not just for dairy, but, you know, for the collective of all of the products in their portfolios. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here because you guys take this environmental work so seriously, but it really does come back to, you know, not just customers, but to consumer trust. So that's why we know that it's important for us to keep moving forward so that we are not just competitive, but leading the competitive set in the global marketplace. Up until, you know, 2020 or so, we had not said too much about zero impact. We were trying to kind of stay around that. Now, the anti-animal ag groups were not staying quiet about it, and our plant-based competitors were not staying quiet about it. But we had not said very much. We were looking at where we are and what we have the potential to do. So as we looked forward, our Environmental Stewardship Committee, and again, Scott is a great representative of that committee, and that committee includes farmers, it includes co-ops, processors, trade associations, and academic and other advisors. And so what that committee did over the last year plus has been really to look at where we stand, what the science says, going across the stakeholder chain, getting input from them to get feedback on where we are and where we need to be. And in early 2020, they proposed, and this statement was approved, as dairy as an environmental solution. And we truly believe that dairy will be an environmental solution, and that's what we're working toward. So the vision statement includes not just greenhouse gas, but statements about water conservation, water quality, soil health, nutrient use, habitat, and just natural resources in general. The goals themselves are, and I just want to call out the word collectively before I even read the goal. And that goal, the expectation, the anticipation is not that every single farm is going to be carbon neutral. The expectation is that together as a U.S. dairy chain from field through processor will, by 2020, become carbon neutral or better, and that we will be able to demonstrate optimized water use and improved water quality because of our optimized utilization of manure and nutrients. The committee did not set specific goals for biodiversity and land use right now. That'll come later. And then there was a lot of discussion around, 2050 is a long way out. Should we have a 2030 goal? The decision was made after a lot of discussion that that a better way of approaching this 2050 goal is to look at and report every 5 years on where we stand. So rather than have multiple goals, let's keep a steady cadence moving forward toward 2020, and that we will be doing absolute reporting each 5 years on where we stand against specific metrics. So again, just emphasizing that this is a collective goal, recognizing the diversity of the U.S. dairy industry, the challenges of different geographic areas are different, the challenges with farms of different sizes are different. So this is absolutely not a cookie cutter approach. Under that umbrella of the 2050 goals is something called the Net Zero Initiative. And that is really an integrated strategy that focuses on the on-farm component of this work. So, we have our visions, there are specific goals, and as we look at what happens on farm, what are the strategies that we need to knock down those barriers so that we can achieve net zero greenhouse gas and then make improvements in water? So this will be looked at in conjunction with what will be going on the processor side. So there are 3 different work streams under net zero, and my boss, Krista Harden, oversees all of this work. I'll show you the full team in just a minute. But there are 3 different areas. One is groundwork, and that's really what do we know and what research do we need to do, what research already exists. Jim Wallace leads this work, and it is really what do we need to do from a foundational level so that we can make the best decisions as we try and report and as we try and develop models that will be helpful for our farms. And again, recognizing geographic size differences and so forth. The next pillar of work is dairy scale for good. And that is, I probably won't say this the way that, the people who directly work on this would, but essentially that is the pilot farm program. So identify a handful of pilot farms, and let's put the technologies that we have on those farms, and let's see what that business case looks like. Let's see if we can decrease capital costs, create revenue streams, and look at what's really involved there so that we can catalyze some of these solutions that seem to work best. And then the last work stream, and that's led by Karen Scanlon, is the collective impact. And as we think, that's looking at how can we increase access to financial support, to resources that are already available out there, to technical support, and really looking at those best practices that will apply across the wide diversity of U.S. farms and propel that work forward. So that, what I've just described is the work of the Net Zero Initiative. I know sometimes it's easy to get overlap between net zero and the goals and the stewardship commitment, but I hope that that's clear. This last slide just shows the interdependency of different works group working together. DMI has a specific role when it comes to the science and convening the chain. NMPF is doing extremely valuable work. We've got to have policy incentives. We've got to have legislative and regulatory enhancements for this work to go forward. That's not work that DMI or the Innovation Center can do, but it is work that is done very effectively by NMPF as well as IDFA. There's work by Nutrient and the U.S. Dairy Export Council. All of these groups are coming together to support this NZI initiative. And this is the team that supports the NZI work. I know I've gone through this really fast, and I apologize for going over with time, but if we don't have time here for questions, Scott, all anybody has to do is just drop me an email or give me a call, and I'd be happy to talk more. And I may not be able to answer the question, but I'll certainly put you in touch with somebody who can.
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you very much. You did a wonderful job of explaining a very difficult and a very complicated presentation and industry initiative. There are so many moving parts to this, and you did a great job of bringing it into focus, which is what the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy has done so well for the last 10 plus years now, is taking very complicated circumstances, making sense of them, and finding ways to create a pre-competitive environment that we can all operate within and serve dairy farmers most effectively. So well done. I really appreciate it. And for all of you that are hanging with us, I know I've lost a couple since 1 o'clock because we've gone a little long, but as you can tell, the content is just fantastic. So if there are no questions at this moment for Lisa, I'd like to introduce Jenny Crabtree. And Jenny is our Senior Vice President here at the American Dairy Association Mideast. She is one of your tremendous ambassadors for the checkoff program, does amazing work in our consumer outreach and our farmer communications along with her team. I'm going to turn the platform over to Jenny. She's got a tremendous message for you. I hope you'll all hang with us and hear what your checkoff program has been doing for you in consumer communications. Take it away, Jenny.
Well, hello. Share my screen here to get going. All right. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about consumer communications and specifically how we together at the national and local level target a specific segment of our population where we believe we can have the most impact. Together through Dairy Management Incorporated and Undeniably Dairy, and locally through the American Dairy Association and our website drink-milk.com and social platforms. Together we have a strong consumer communications program in place to build trust in dairy. And as I said, we do this by targeting a specific group of our population who we affectionately call the conflicted health seeker. Through segmentation studies that we do, we learn what makes this audience tick so that we can tailor messages to really make an impact. Let's meet our conflicted health seeker. This audience is 58% female between the ages of 25 and 54. She has kids, educated, and she works full-time. She's informed, socially, and environmentally conscious, and she uses social media. She's very active. She lives a green lifestyle. We do know that she consumes some dairy, but she is skeptical. She actively seeks out information and she shares it with others. We consider her to be an influencer as well as our target consumer. And so to resonate with this conflicted health seeker, it's important that dairy connects its messaging to the health of the planet and the animals, to wellness of people, and to the betterment of communities. However, during the last several months, we've had to shift our content and our social media strategy so that we're thoughtful, sensitive, and relevant during these uncertain times. Our overarching goal during the last several months has been to reassure consumers that the dairy supply is safe and nutritious. It was important for us to be mindful of the current landscape and to continually evaluate so that we could continue to build trust in dairy. That remains our #1 goal. We carefully shared how dairy was essential in nourishing communities to generate a halo of goodwill from industry actions during the crises to positively impact consumers' hearts and minds. And lastly, we strive to be helpful where we believed we could offer the most value and serve as a resource to meet people's needs when appropriate. In order to do this, though, and to be relevant, we needed to better understand how might our target consumer change during this time period. They were online more than they have ever been before, looking for balance and guidance to help them ensure that their families had access to food, to keep their kids occupied, to manage anxiety as the future looked uncertain and the economy was suffering. And because people were online more than ever before, we decided to ramp up our digital presence and increase our online support to reach this target audience and beyond. Cooking was actually the #1 quarantine activity, according to some studies that we did during this time period. Consumers were online watching chef videos, looking for easy recipes and searching ways to preserve food. So we used social media as a way to share dairy-centric meal and snack ideas that families could enjoy while at home, offer solutions for storing and cooking with dairy foods, and we answered a lot of questions as it related to food safety concerns. And you can see on the screen, this is just a sample of a variety of different social media posts and resources and ways that we communicated to our consumers during this time period. Another key area was health and wellness information. We were careful not to overemphasize dairy's nutritional value as a way to protect against COVID, but rather framed it up as a way that they could help keep their families healthy during this time. And as schools closed, we shared educational resources digitally and highlighted virtual opportunities for students. But we also recognized that families were looking for fun stay-at-home activities to keep everyone entertained, to keep the kids occupied. Streaming movies and TV shows actually were second and third place in some of the studies to see what folks were up to during this time. So we were creative and published a blog that paired several recipes with different film genres. That's just one example of how we looked at our current resources and tried to frame them up in a way that could be helpful during this time. And lastly, we reminded consumers that dairy farmers have always been committed to their communities, whether it's by providing safe, nutritious dairy foods or helping people get access to the food that they need, whether that was at home or at school. And because we know video is such a powerful way to communicate, we created a 2-week digital campaign in mid-April to further bring this message home. The campaign delivered more than 2.7 million impressions in Ohio and West Virginia. The ads could be seen on local TV news websites, as well as a variety of special interest sites that our target audience uses on a regular basis. We also use social media to promote the campaign. I'll talk just in a few minutes about how we were able to strategically target our primary audience, but first, let's take a moment to watch the video. nationally, Dairy Management Incorporated also created a COVID response video, and we also amplified their video. We'll watch that. DMI also pushed out numerous similar resources. And the great part about an integrated communications plan is that national and all the local, state, and regional organizations across the country work together to share and amplify each other's information. Communicating via social media is a 24/7, 365-day job because people are online all the time. And so it gives us a lot of great assets to be able to share and reach our audience. Now, National Dairy Month looked a little different this year as we continued to be in the midst of the pandemic and our country was dealing with social unrest. But we continued to use our COVID response video because the message remained very relevant throughout June. We also continued to provide helpful resources, recipes, and share dairy's role in nourishing communities. However, about mid-month, we were able to sprinkle in some National Dairy Month fun. We released new content, one of those being an animation called What Do Cows Eat? And it already in just 3 weeks time garnered over 30,000 views. So we know that the content that we were pushing out is being well received and is still relevant. We also enlisted the help of several Ohio dairy farmers to help us create our very first TikTok video, which also has been very well received. This was a fun video that we could promote on social media and wrap some language around it to really help explain the many hats that dairy farmers wear. Let's take a quick look. I'm sure many of you saw some familiar faces in that fun little piece that we shared. So if you're wondering why maybe you personally haven't seen all of the great content that I've highlighted today, it's because you aren't our primary target audience. We know that you are a dairy lover already. And if you think back to the first slides that I shared that talked a little bit about our audience, we have to make sure that we are reaching her. So we promote our content by using 2 different types of digital advertising to make sure that our primary audience sees it. The first uses third-party data to strategically target our audience by geography, gender, age, income, occupation, online behaviors. This helps us place our information, our videos, and our resources directly on websites and in social media feeds that the audience is browsing. I'm sure all of you have been on a website and all of a sudden something that you were looking at maybe earlier that day, an ad pops up for it. We use this type of advertising to effectively promote our content, and we use this during our COVID response video campaign as well. We use this behavioral targeting also to ensure that our content shows up on social media feeds. It also helps us not only promote our content, but it drives traffic to our website and increases our followers. And secondly, we use page search to ensure that our resources show up when a consumer is Googling for information. We do this by picking keywords that can be changed at any time. These keywords are very relevant, top of mind, and we can be flexible with those so that if an issue or something happens in the news and we want to be able to address it, we can put our information up front. Here's just a few examples of some of the online advertising that we use to promote the COVID-19 response video. And you can see just how prominently our information, the video in this case, was placed on these pages. Not only was it local news stations, but also special interest websites that our consumer was browsing. And here are just a few more examples of social media advertising as well as page search. Now, over the last 4 months, our efforts have been working. We had a very, very significant digital reach. This is our total online presence. It includes the majority of our social networks as well as online news sites, magazines, newspapers, TV, radio, news blogs, and so forth. And certainly our 2-week digital campaign played a key role in having such strong results during April through June. However, over the last 4 months, our website traffic also was very strong. It actually increased 75% from the previous period. Website visits are driven by our social media posts, Google ads, our online ads, and of course our digital newsletters that we send to consumers. Our social media reach was very strong. Specifically, our COVID response video had 2.8 million views, and those are completion views. That means 2.8 million views of the entire spot, not just 5 or 10 seconds of it. And then lastly, I mentioned that we pushed out many new recipes since cooking was the #1 activity, and the new recipes that we shared reached over 1 million people in those last 4 months. So as we move forward, we're going to continue to focus on our conflicted health seeker. We're going to monitor and evaluate our digital presence to make sure that the content that we're sharing is appropriate, that it's framed up in the right tone, but still reaches our target audience and builds trust in our consumers. With that, I'll pause and turn it back over to Aaron and Scott, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions or can chat with others at a later date.
Jenny, thank you very much. What a tremendous report. And I realize, folks, that this is not the most optimum environment to be able to engage with our speakers and ask questions. And my apologies to those of you who might have tried to raise your hand and interact with us. Like I said, it's not optimum, but I just want to thank you all for doing that. If there are any questions for our speakers as we bring it to a close, I would open it up now. And Aaron, let us know if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, so far I don't see any, but I'll keep an eye out.
Okay, very good. Well, I want to simply bring it to a close then. Thank all of our speakers, Mike, Jim, Lisa, Jenny. You all did a tremendous job. You are carrying a major responsibility on behalf of the dairy farmers that we represent here in Ohio. And I certainly do appreciate all of you for being our speakers. Your content was great. Your deliveries were excellent. And we are recording this, so it is our hope that there'll be wider and more broad exposure for your messages. And I'd like to thank you all for doing that. For our sponsors, I want to bring your attention back to those folks who sponsor us and work with us every day throughout the year, supporting Ohio's dairy farmers in our mission to work on regulatory and legislative issues that impact our farms and our farm families. We'll continue to work diligently to collaborate with everybody at the local level, at the national level, to make sure that dairy farmers are served effectively and appropriately to represent your dairy farm families and do the best work we can to represent you on local and national issues. So with that, I'll bring this to a close, thanking all of our speakers once again. Thank you all for being a part of our program today. I want to wish you the best, and thanks for hanging with us that extra 30 minutes. I know it was long, but it was worth every moment of it. And look at it this way, because it was a virtual meeting, you don't have to get in your vehicles and spend 2 hours or 3 hours driving back. You can just walk out your door and contemplate the information that was shared with you today. Again, be sure to visit our website, odpa.org. take a look, and if you want to revisit any of the videos, they'll be available to you. And with that, thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.